Thank you for listening to the Impact Leaders podcast, featuring leaders in sustainable and impact investment, sharing their stories, experiences, and advice to increase awareness and highlight best practices in order to help us transition more capital into the industry faster. I am grateful that you're choosing to invest your time to listen to our guests, since I know that you're going to feel encouraged and inspired. I am JP Dallmann, founder and CEO of ILA Partners, and we're the proud sponsors of the podcast. ILA Partners is an advisory and soon-to-launch multi-asset management firm targeting to acquire and scale investment funds focused on sustainability and impact, one of the fastest-growing areas of investment management globally, enabling investors to generate returns with confidence whilst having a net positive impact in the world. Our mission is to facilitate and accelerate the transition of 5 billion of capital to sustainable impact investing in the next 5 years. If you would like to explore the opportunity of working together, email contact@ilapartners.com for an introductory and confidential conversation. Your support means everything to us, since it's what really keeps us going. So make sure you share our work with someone that will benefit from it. Please remember to subscribe to get the notifications and check the notes from each episode. We hope you enjoyed today's special conversation. So hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Impact Leaders. I hope everyone is keeping well. And today's episode we have our new episode of Impact Leaders, and it's still on our current series of the Sustainable Investment Dilemma, looking at how industry can help address the climate and social crisis, in particular the financial industry. Although today we look at another industry taking on the opportunity to find and fund the solutions we need for a sustainable future. And in order to do that, we have another special guest today, and that is Dr. Reinhard Huebner. Hello, Reinhard.
Hi, JP. Good afternoon.
Yeah, welcome, and thank you very much for joining me today. And thank you straight away to Andrew Walker for making the great introduction. A real pleasure, to have you with us. And today you are in Frankfurt, right?
Yes, but Hamburg, which is slightly north of Frankfurt.
Very nice, very nice. So it's another first for the podcast. Today, so we have somebody from Germany, but then we are going to be focusing on industrial investment, in particularly water, including some of the challenges and opportunities in the sector. So I'm very, very excited, to have you with us, Reinhard, and to learn, a little bit more about your values and your company's, drivers, some of maybe the lessons and suggestions you may have, for the industry and for investors, and obviously to see your view on how the market is evolving, especially, with water, how much it impacts on everyone's lives. So let me quickly give a short introduction for the listeners' benefit. So Dr. Reinhard Huebner is the CEO, Chief Executive Officer at SKion Water, and an investment manager at SKion. With the background in industrial operations, Dr. Huebner has over 17 years of professional experience, including with an international management consultancy. And since 2010, he has been responsible for the development and management of the investment portfolio in the water technology sector at SKion. Anything else I should add, Reinhard?
That's fine. It's pretty complete.
Nice. And let me start with the first question that we ask our guest, Reinhard. So what is sustainable impact investment to you, perhaps personally, and then from either water perspective or industrial solutions perspective?
Yeah, as you said, my background is industrial operations. So I did a lot of efficiency type manufacturing projects, and I still teach manufacturing at the university because I'm passionate about it. But when you then come home after a day of optimization and you say, okay, I saved 1.5% production cost for product so-and-so today, after a while it wears off, because yes, it's important because companies need to be efficient, but so what about yet another day with 1.5% saved here or percent saved there. It was always nice if it was, for example, saving energy, because it saves cost and it's good for the environment. So when I did logistics networks, and you reduce the transport distance, or you reduce the number of trucks needed, then you had an environmental impact and a financial impact. With what we do now at SKion Water in the water technology sector, there's always a link of some broader purpose, environmental or social, depending on what part of the water value chain you're looking at. And obviously also business. I mean, we're making money, and we're here to make money because we reinvest that money into innovation and into acquiring new companies. But it's always having in mind that this is about the environment and about a resource without which humanity cannot exist. And so if I were to define impact investing, it's about investing with a purpose. And the purpose not being making more money out of money, but something above and beyond money. That's my personal definition, and that's why I'm very passionate about this, because it is also making a difference on a resource without which we can't live.
I see, and I'll bring back a couple of the points that you make later in the episode, as I picked up from other interviews that I heard you before as well as speak about, which really resonate. But if I also give people a bit of context, so there are, let's call it a group company, which is SKion, right?
Yeah.
And that is for everyone that wants to go and see, is SKion.D for Delta, E for Echo. And then you have SKion Water, which you can go to skionwater.com. And then so you have, so SKion, when you look at it, it looks like industrial investment, right? So it's an investment company of the German entrepreneur Susanne Kletten, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of return focused, it's value based, and you develop industrial investment across economic, industrial, and technological cycles, right? And SKion Water is the subsidiary of SKion. So we were talking before offline. So it's a very lean operation in terms of group company, and then it's just basically the, let's call it verticals, where in this case you look at water technology investment for the group, right?
Yeah.
And then I picked up, specifically from the founder, Mrs. Kletten, that so she has a couple of statements on the website that I picked up, which is, you are a kind of global water and wastewater technology solution provider, and the whole point about that without water there is no life, and for water there is no substitute, right? So it's a pretty life defining resource that we are talking about here. And I think I was talking to you before as well, that I think people, I've said personally first, right? So I was very honest, and I put my hand up. So I think that I haven't really woken up until not long ago about some of the real challenges that we're facing, and we will talk globally, but then I'm sure that we're going to talk about the local factor as well. So anything that you can share with us about, before I keep talking too much, that you want to share with us about the group and SKion Water, perhaps, just again for the benefit of the listeners.
Yeah, very happy to do so. I mean, the water piece at SKion started when SKion Water didn't exist, right? SKion is an industrial investment holding, as you said. There's investments that have been in the family of Mrs. Kletten for a long time, like Altana. And then there's new investments that have been done over the last 10 years or so. And we look at various sectors. We're, for example, also invested in a company called Avista Oil, which does used lubricants recycling. We're invested in some more industrial innovative technologies such as Lambda digital printing. We're also invested in a company called SGL Carbon, which is a material science company with many applications in electrification, like there's a graphite is used in all batteries, is used in all kinds of electrical and electronic processes, devices. So there's a broader mandate to do purposeful investments at SKion. And Mrs. Kletten had decided she wants to do something entrepreneurial in water. And when I started, there was just this concept. I want to do something meaningful in water, but it wasn't clear where we would go. And the strategy evolved over the last 10 years. And in 2019, we decided that we will make this a group that has a name and a face to the outside world. And today, SKion Water is roughly 3,000 people and 750 million euros in turnover. But it's a very decentral outfit. So the brands in the market that are most known are Ovivo, Eliquo, and Envirochemie and PAC. So basically, we created SKion Water when the portfolio in the water sector became so big that it was purposeful to create an entity that is the umbrella brand or whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm. So, apologies, I missed the part about, so you say about 3,000 people across the portfolio, and that's just for SKion Water?
Yes.
And what is the revenues you mentioned?
750 million euros roughly.
750 million. And this is the fascinating part, because as well, I was trying to map out in my head the growth. And I think you mentioned, right? So it's about 10 years of, the kind of the journey. I looked at you have this initial. I like the timeline on the website for people to go and see. So you have the initial dividend of this 2.5 billion, which I'm assuming is kind of how the whole group started. In terms of self-funded, right?
Yeah.
And then since then you have had all these investments. Then you have, if I got that correctly as well, so SKion Water specifically starts the timeline about 2019, right?
SKion Water, I mean, the investment started in 2011, right?
Right.
The first meaningful investment in water was a stake in PAC, 20% minority stake in PAC, end of 2011. And when we grew, we realized that now we're at the point where this is not just some investments anymore, but it's a group of companies. And then in 2019, we created SKion Water as the umbrella company for the water piece. By then, we were not as big as today, but we were already more than 2,000 people and something like 600 million in turnover.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's fascinating because I really like some of the statements around. I mean, it's just the proof of everything you're telling me. Very quickly we are covering, but I just picked up again a couple of really great statements from Mrs. Gladden around aspiration, right, to invest strategically in companies with persistent, successful business models, right, and excellent and ambitious management teams. And we were just talking about teams just before, so we may come back to that. And as I look at, I'm trying to understand the self-funded part. So it's right now it's fully private, right? So it's a private equity type vehicle.
Yeah, it's not private equity because we have no exit strategy. So it's not a fund. It's a evergreen, you would call it in fund terms, but it's the investment holding of Mrs. Gladden, and it will be. The assets will be handed over to the next generation at some point.
Excellent. So yes, so the fully, some people call it fully capitalized investment group, right?
Yeah.
Fascinating, and then again, basically all completely self-funded, and so right now, well, again, because it's all, I don't know if there is information around how large the portfolio is. Is that something that is available? No. Okay. And then the only thing, so if I just, and obviously people can see, some of the great investments you have made. There's a really good list as well available on the website, that goes from Altana and touches on all the different countries and the different stakes. So I like that, because at least you give some kind of visibility for people to understand, how the group is put together, which, most people really struggle, Reinhard, because people that are successful, doing it well, sometimes just kind of keep it as a secret, right? So, and in this case, I think there is enough, there for people to actually be able to see how you're doing it. We
are also actively looking for more investment opportunities, right? So it's a give and take. You need to somehow be transparent about what you do to be attractive for potential partners who seek an investor, right?
Yes. And on that point, right? So because I saw there is if I talk about kind of your, let's call it a client / investments, in this case, you don't get funds from investors as such, but you're looking for investees, right?
Yeah.
So you focus on, at the group level, it says the investment focus is in companies with revenues between 300 million and 2.5 billion euros, and across the different sectors: industrial goods and services, electrical engineering, optics, renewable energy, closed loop material cycles, IT. So it's quite broad, right? And then you have the water part, which if I like the map, by the way, on SKion Water. I think I counted about 10 investments on the portfolio.
Yeah, there's more inside the platform companies. When they buy, we don't show it the same way, but we do a lot of the M&A work for our larger companies as well.
No, fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So that is great. So basically, part of the strategic investment in the companies, it comes with the extra added value of your expertise. We're
also helping them with their own M&A then, or many of them never did real M&A before, because they did maybe once in a while buy a smaller competitor or something, but no structured M&A.
Yeah. And let me, and this is, it's all, I don't know, I'm very energized today, by the way. I think you can tell, right? But because there is a point there that, again, I want to bring it when we talk about scalability, which is that the sector is very, very fragmented, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunities, challenges, again, and opportunities there. But if you want to maybe share a bit more about your portfolio on the water side, than perhaps what you're looking for. I picked up in one example, by the way. I picked up in one example, which is Ecopreneur in Chile, which I like because I used to live in Chile once upon a time. But
Ecopreneur is a fun story. But the way we looked at it is we also have a bit of a technology mission. So we want to make a difference to the water sector as well. And so what we concluded early on is we need access to the end customer, because the problems are with the water user. And if we are close to these users, we can help develop solutions that solve some of these problems. And if we just provide components like pumps or valves or something, we don't have this end customer relationship. And also we don't deliver the complete solution. So we don't solve a problem. We just deliver a component and somebody else solves the problem. So that was the first principle. The second principle was we will focus on treatment. We will not do networks like sewer or drinking water networks. That's no decision that this is not attractive, but more you can't do everything unless you are really such a big conglomerate that you get to a meaningful size in each of these areas. So we focused on treatment, and we are selective in municipal treatment because in many countries it's still difficult to operate when the customer is some sort of government or government-like entity. In industrial, we are much broader geographically because there's less issues with compliance. And we do freshwater and wastewater. And at the high end of the scale, we do ultra pure water for semiconductor manufacturing. At the low end of the scale, we do just normal household wastewater. And then we built this up geographically as well. So we have this matrix of municipal, industrial, freshwater, wastewater, and then geographies. And since you mentioned Ecopreneur, Ecopreneur was something that was a lucky coincidence. When Ecopreneur came on the market, it's not so big, it's like 15 million in turnover. When Ecopreneur looked for a partner, acquirer, because the existing shareholders actually were reaching an age where they just had to sell, where they were above 70. It was like, it's slightly too small, slightly too far away to do it. Somebody asked me, why on earth did you have to pick such a small company so far away? But the answer was very easy. They were already a distributor of our portfolio company, PAC. And the feedback we got from PAC on how they perform was just super positive. And so we said, okay, if we have worked with them already on many projects and it's been very successful every time, they must be really good. So we acquired it, and it has been a great journey. It's an amazing company with an amazing team. So this is also then sometimes the coincidence is that they were already partnering with one of our existing companies.
And yeah, and that's fascinating. And let me come back to well, let me start from there because what comes to my mind is, and as I mentioned, I used to live in Chile for quite some time, and I have a focus on LATAM as well because there's a real challenge to sometimes get investors, especially European investors, to be looking and focusing, like you just mentioned it, right? Many times it's because of the size, right?
Yeah.
So it's a good example. That's why I picked it up. I'm guessing, because it's a good example for people to look and understand how some of these opportunities arise, right? So there is kind of again another track record, a relationship already in place. It's a proven. So it just doesn't happen overnight, right? So these people must have been working on the company for decades. So pretty established organization as well.
Yeah. And there's a lot of potential in South America and Latin America. We have very successful operations in Brazil. With Ecopreneur, we cover Chile and Peru, and we're somewhat covering Colombia. We're going to increase our presence in Colombia. We're talking to another potential partner in Brazil about something. So it's a continent with a lot of potential and lots of water issues, obviously. I mean, in some parts, it's the mining operations that are water challenged. Brazil also has a lot of biological wastewater from all the sugarcane and similar activities. So it's overall a very, very interesting region.
Yes. And obviously, again, with a lot of issues, with there's a couple of points here that maybe I wanted to bring up to, and perhaps you want to suggest to the listeners where to look at. But water is not as simple as people may think. Right? So you touched, I think, on quite a few parts of it in terms of fresh water, wastewater, the industrial, the municipal, right? So treatment, right? So people sometimes miss the point that is so diverse and much more complex, and at times, also, although you may think it's all the same, it's all separated, right? Yeah. So
I mean, the problem also is it's invisible assets mostly, right? They're dug in the street. They have to last 100 years for the economics to work. The pipes and valves in the streets are actually the most expensive assets in the water value chain. Yeah. Even though they're very low tech, because it is both the cost of the material, but also the cost of digging the trenches to put them in. And only when it fails do people realize how annoying it is if you don't have water for 3 days and you can't flush your toilet. Yeah. And can't take a shower. The amount of water we drink compared to the amount of water we consume is relatively small. People on average, depending on the country, consume in developed countries between 120 maybe to 400 liters per person per day. They drink 1 or 2 maybe, right? Depending on what the drinking pattern is of that tap water. The rest is then bottled water, juice, Coca-Cola, what else. And only when it's not there, you realize how difficult it is. And I mean, we can, theoretically speaking, we can live without electricity for quite a while. It's also annoying, but I mean, you die of thirst much faster than you starve.
Yeah, or from seeing. That's a great point. And you mentioned also, it comes across there at the point about infrastructure, right? So some of these, I mentioned in one of the previous episodes that we talked to one of our clients in Brazil. We were talking about the privatization of the Rio de Janeiro water company. So there's still things happening, in the region, and in that case, across the world, right? But there really are real problems with infrastructure, right? And that happens even here in the UK, where I'm based. Where again, people are not really aware of the challenges we're facing just with infrastructure, let alone with innovation and technology, right?
Yeah, I mean, let's take a very simple example, because I know them well and I worked for them for a while. Thames Water always gets blamed for the leakage losses, right? And there's 2 other aspects to consider. One is in the UK, you cannot force customers to have water meters. So the entire leakage is a statistical model and not real measured leakage, because you can't measure leakage if customers don't have water meters. And also, most of these pipes are somewhere in the streets of London, and if you dig them out to repair them, you each time create chaos, and you make the news because yet again a road is closed and traffic goes completely wrong. So you get really good press for fixing water pipes.
And then if you go to the other extreme, in terms of, let's say, farming, right? So people, don't talk about it and don't. Definitely most people. I will put myself in that camp, and I'm kind of extrapolating. Don't understand how much, like you mentioned, the 120, 140 liters. It means across everything that belongs to a person to be able to live, right? If that's the way, is that how you calculate it? 120?
No, it's a direct water consumption. The water contained in food comes on top.
Right.
And I mean, 80% roughly of the world's freshwater consumption is agriculture. Yeah. And agriculture consumes massive amounts. And in some parts of the world, this is no problem because there's enough rainfall. In other parts of the world, if this is irrigation and you pump groundwater, you deplete resources that will never recover. And I mean, you can see this not because of agriculture necessarily, but you can see this in some cities like Jakarta. The water consumption is so high that city is sinking. Every year, the soil sinks because of the water that's taken out of the soil. I think the same is happening in Mexico City, but I'm not 100% sure. So it really is also that we're depleting resources for agriculture. And I mean, yes, we need agriculture, but there's also still very inefficient practices in agriculture about irrigation. And you can argue, does it make sense to produce rice in California, given the water scarcity in the west of the US? But historically, the water rights in the US work by seniority. And if you don't use it, you lose it. So if you have the water right, you use it because you don't want to lose it.
Which touches kind of now beyond water, which is the sustainable consumption and legislation and other points, right? And you mentioned, and again, I'll try to remember all of this because when we talked about the future, I want to bring some of these points, but you touched on the point about technology, right, and data. And you touched on the point about the municipal part, and you didn't talk about regulations just yet, but in one of the forums I was in, some of the experts in water, they were talking about a combination of, I think, consumers being very mindful about data, and kind of what does that mean in terms of the benefit and the ownership of the data, and is there a real benefit, or is just again more value for the investor? People start getting a bit paranoid. I can see this again and again in terms of I'll throw a couple more things here, Reinhard. So people start getting paranoid as I do a bit of a pulse check around the intentions of the investors, right, from this impact part, and also from a kind of, again, a kind of imperialist history, right, of like the Europeans or the Western world coming into the different regions, to invest and basically then take the money away, right, the returns. Sorry, I threw a couple of things there, but yeah, I don't know if you have anything that you have been thinking about.
I mean, let me start with maybe the second part of your question, the investors going into geographies and in developing countries and investing there. I think it's not so much the investment part. What concerned me more is that from an engineering point of view in the water sector, we basically ended up doing the same thing, the same type of infrastructure in developing countries that we did in the developed world. And the developed world was designed 100 to 150 years ago when times were different. And doing the same design now these days is a missed opportunity. For example, if you want to do proper recycling of wastewater to in total use less water, it makes sense to be much more decentralized because then you can recycle more easily if you don't have to go to a centralized wastewater treatment plant and then have to redistribute the treated wastewater to the point of consumption again, because typically the wastewater treatment is downstream because water flows with gravity, and the fresh water is upstream, and then there's lots of concerns about direct potable reuse. So typically you have a separate network of pipes for the recycled water and so on. This is all crazy because you can very safely drink recycled wastewater. Otherwise we wouldn't have a space station, right? They go in circles with that water all the time. But so there's a missed opportunity in exporting our version of the infrastructure that I personally find much more concerning than whether there's an investor investing into a company in, say, Southeast Asia, and then also making some profit. Because on the flip side, at least what we do, we also take huge risks. I mean, when we build treatment plants, we take the risk that if it doesn't work, we have to make it work. And so if you look at the risk return profile of the EPC or solution provider business model in the water sector, the risk return profile is not like brilliant, because the risks are actually pretty high compared to the return. The first question, part of the question was data and digitalization. It's a very powerful opportunity, digitalization, also for the water sector. For the consumer, it's not so relevant because, like in electricity, you have this data play on influencing demand patterns, so that when there's a lot of renewable energy, you use it, and when there's no renewable energy, you don't use it, where the data is needed to control networks and make use efficient. In water, since you can store water, and since the price of producing water is not so much depending on time of day or time of year, and the consumption is also not so much influenceable. I mean, when you go to the toilet, you go to the toilet. You don't wait for electricity to become cheaper, right? It's not the data, the consumer data is not such a big piece of the puzzle, but operational data from customer sites can be very valuable in optimizing processes. And some customers are concerned about the security, especially if it's municipal sites, that there's access to their systems that could be used to intrude from a cybersecurity point of view. There's also concerns if you get too much software or data as a service type business models. If your provider goes bankrupt, like it's a startup providing a service to you, and if it's a critical service and the startup goes bankrupt, then you actually, as a utility, have a major problem because all of a sudden you're out of service. There was a company called Fathom that did the customer interface in a software as a service type business model. So it was a CRM system for utilities, but not internal CRM, but the portal for the customers and also for the meter reading and the invoicing and so on. That company went bankrupt, and lots of utilities all of a sudden couldn't send invoices anymore, couldn't do tickets anymore if customers had a technical problem. I mean, that's where I can understand that the data piece is also an element of it might be lower quality and slower if I do it myself and if it's on premise. But at least I control my destiny, and if my partner goes bankrupt, I don't have stranded customers.
Okay. So it's okay. I understand. So more basically towards the industrial and the kind of the more B2B side of the business, right?
I mean, there's a lot of opportunity also in the data, absolutely, on the industrial side, in the municipal and the operation as well. There's a lot of opportunity. The question just is, do you always have to enforce this, what's now en vogue, the software as a service and all in the cloud type model? Or do you at least build the resiliency into your solution that it also works when the internet is down? Because critical infrastructure also has to work without internet. You can't say a water treatment plant will stop working if there's no internet. It has backup power systems and generators so that it works when there's no power. It also needs to work when there's no internet.
Yes. And so you're doing all of these different investments, right? So all the different areas. The one thing that I was trying to understand was around how do you identify and measure impact. So it's kind of, I think, self-explanatory, how you operate as an investment company. I think that by all means, if there's anything that you think we should share, let's do that. But the other part is you are definitely having, an impact in the different companies, the different communities where your companies operate, do you have a system or a methodology that you use to?
It's a really good question. We are not done with that yet. There are some things that are easier to measure, like with some of our solutions, directly save energy or produce renewable energy. And then you can say, what's the CO2 equivalent that we saved by deploying this technology? And that's then a measurable impact. If we say refurbish a municipal wastewater treatment plant, then the impact is that it would last another 30, 40 years, but the wastewater will still be the same quality as before, because it's not about better quality, it's just about making sure it will continue to work, right? How do you measure the impact of that, and can we claim credit for that? A bit hard to say. I doubt it, but still it has to be done, right? Because otherwise our infrastructure will fall apart. So what we look at, as I mentioned, is the energy CO2 piece. We also look at, are we able to deploy innovative technologies that solve a problem that hasn't been solved so far, like micropollutants, or we're now having a product that eliminates methane emissions from sludge treatment facilities, and methane is much more detrimental to the atmosphere than CO2. So on that one, for example, we measure again what CO2 equivalents did we save by deploying that technology. So we're having parts of the puzzle, but there's no complete system in place yet where I say it actually fully reflects what we do.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, I just thought I'd just check because I think it's very important. So you just to stress again what you I think alluded to as well, and I think that it's obvious in terms of the strategy of the founder and the business that the family had before. But it looks here you quote that investment horizon you look at is a decade and beyond.
Yeah.
And obviously because it says it takes time to sustainably increase enterprise value, and that's how you look at it. And that's why you stand kind of with your portfolio companies as a partner, and I understand very clearly with the corporate finance services, with everything else that you do to help with the different cycles, right? And then one thing I picked up was on one of the companies, I think it was you mentioned throughout Africa in terms of access to water. Was that Eliquo?
Yeah, they did a project in, I think it was Cameroon, right?
Yeah, Uganda.
Sorry,
yeah. Okay, because
access to clean water is a very simple or very difficult topic, depending on how you look at it. From a technology point of view, it is relatively simple. It's not a technology challenge to clean water to drinking water standards. The simplest solution that we have developed and want to help scale is using a ceramic membrane that we're partnering with and also shareholder of as a filter for contaminated groundwater or borehole water. And then you have a very simple manual pump-like device that pushes the water through the membrane and you get safe drinking water out of it. The challenge in access to safe water is mostly the political environment and basically governments wanting to make it happen. There's many vested interests in many countries around water being supplied by truck because it's very profitable to sell this water coming out of a truck. And these people don't like if their business model is taken away from them. There's also some governance required if you have wells and things. So like that, there's this idea of water kiosks that is actually pretty good because there's then a business model of people working in these kiosks and thus making sure that they get maintained because it's local jobs for the local community. And at the end, there's also needs to be a little bit of a willingness to pay, right? If people don't pay, and we're talking very small amounts, of course, if they don't pay, the problem is what's free is worth nothing. Then people don't treat it carefully. That's also the problem when water is for free. This debate about the human right to water, yes, the human right to water is absolutely clear, but it shouldn't be completely free because then people just waste it. It must be affordable, right? But not free. People are willing to pay for their cell phone, and they're willing to pay for their cell phone much more than for safe water. Now, it's difficult to say this kind of stuff when you're living in a very privileged country from a water perspective, such as Germany. But my take is access to safe water to a large extent is a governance problem. And I mean, we do this thing with these water filters based on the ceramic membrane. We also did things where we basically had equipment donated that we took out of existing water treatment plants in Germany, and then our people donated their time to set it up in that case in a city in Africa. We also collaborate with a foundation called the Neven Subotic Foundation. Neven Subotic is a Premier League soccer player who's doing a lot of great work on providing safe drinking water in Ethiopia, in particular in schools, so that kids can go to school, because then you have the impact if they don't get sick from contaminated water, they can attend school more, and then obviously this has a major impact on their future. So there is these kinds of initiatives, but if it really is supposed to scale, it must be self-funding, and it must be that the governance is right for it to work.
Yeah. So I mean, again, you're touching so many points, and we are just touching on one of all of them, which is safe drinking water and the human right. There is something about effectively the mindset of people, right, in terms of the appreciation, and it's just like you say, we just open the tap and we just we just get the water in these countries and in some of the developed countries, and it's one of the kind of inverted commas, cheapest resources that we pay for, right? And then it's also interesting because I did watch a couple of documentaries, and it was one on the back of the privatization of the industry in the UK, and how they made I think it was illegal to stop providing the water even if people didn't pay for the bills. That was something that I picked up, So and then there is more. So I don't want to just go into the drinking side because it's one of the things that really affects people. But again, there is some even a lot of marketing happening. And you mentioned on the political part, one of the experts from Latin actually as well on this forum that I was in was talking about the stakeholders and the political power, right, and the political will to make things happen. And now I like the examples you gave because you gave me a bit more clarity about. I get it. I know what you're talking about in terms of the business models,
Yeah. And let me. I just pulled one thing because I think it's super fascinating. It's not really Adam Smith, but he put it in his book, The Value of Nations, the value of water versus the value of diamonds. And it's called the water diamond paradoxon, that diamonds are very valuable, financially speaking, but have no value in use, maybe except for industrial diamonds that you need for drilling, right? So they're pretty useless, but people pay shitloads of money for them. Whereas water is about survival. Without water, you don't survive, but people are willing to pay almost nothing only for water. And Adam Smith has coined this in a very nice way with the value in use and the actual value. It's a bit sad that society in many parts, or not the society, that mankind more or less doesn't appreciate the full value of water.
Yeah, amen. I completely agree and understand. I think so. Hopefully, this episode is gonna help at least a few people get a bit more value and understanding. And thank you for the quote. I'll definitely. Yeah, I always say, like, sometimes when I have these conversations, I pick up the title of the episode. So maybe this one would be called the Water Diamond.
Nice one.
So, and the other thing I was gonna come back is interesting that, as we talk about sustainable impact investing more and sustainable investing, and obviously ESG, etc. And companies now transitioning, from just doing their business to trying to become more sustainable and impactful. So it's good to see another example of somebody that set up to find solutions for industries. The fact that you've been going for let's say over 10 years, and it wasn't kind of a, sometimes we talk about theory of change, or it wasn't specifically, where now you're actually creating a lot of impact, but you're still not, aside from the high level measurements such as emissions, methane, etc. You mentioned that you're not doing, maybe you're not obsessing about it. You're just obsessing about making the investments and creating the portfolio, right? But you're definitely having it.
I mean, at the end of the day, every day we have to solve our customers' problems, and that absorbs most of our attention.
Yeah.
So we are looking at quantifying some of the impact, as I mentioned, but at the end of the day, success is if we solve our customers' water challenges.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna check with you before, if people want to understand and learn more about this supply chain, and is there one resource that you would recommend for people to visit?
It's not so easy. There's if it's about innovation in water, for example, there's a PhD that a guy called Paul O'Callaghan wrote. He's the CEO of Blue Tech Research, or O2 Environmental. They are doing research in the water sector. So they also do publications on innovation. That gives a pretty good overview of how difficult it is to get innovation deployed in water. To understand the water sector, there's obviously stuff that is more than utility driven or industrial driven. If you want to understand water scarcity, there still is an old piece of work that we did during my McKinsey time, the 2030 Water Resources Group. They did basically cost curves for supply-demand imbalances in water. How can you increase supply or decrease consumption to close these gaps? And this was done regionally because water is not something you can transport so easily. It's already more than 10 years old, but it gives a bit of a picture on the supply-demand situation and what the challenges are in the water sector.
Okay.
The typical industry magazine is Global Water Intelligence, where a lot can be found on what's going on in the water sector from a commercial point of view, including companies and technologies and so on.
Yeah, and then
it is a fragmented sector, and hence there's also a lot of local issues and local peculiarities, where hence it's difficult to find an overview of the world's water situation, which is a bit different. The difference also to something like emissions, because emissions you can trade. If I save emissions in one country, the world benefits. If I save water in one country, the other countries don't benefit necessarily, right? Most of the time they don't, because water is just too expensive, too heavy and too cheap to transport, and also too energy intensive to transport. It would be insane from an energy point of view to transport water very long distances. I mean, of course, in meaningful quantities, right? I mean, the bottled water you can ship across the ocean, and that's why you can buy San Pellegrino water in the US and it's shipped from Italy. Now, does it make sense to ship water?
Yeah.
Does it make sense to ship bottled water from Italy to the US or from France to the US? Don't get me excited about that. From an environmental point of view, it's completely crazy, but whatever.
Yeah. I think on that one, I mentioned several episodes ago about the consumption of bottled water in Nigeria. Who has they have in Lagos, they have like tremendous challenges with waste and drinking water, right? Very small people of the population, a small part of the population can actually access it, and then the rest is all bottles.
Yeah, and the sad part is not so bottled water is not evil because of the water consumed. Like when people freak out about how much water Nestle puts into bottles, the total water quantity is negligible compared to the consumption of a big city that is having piped water, right? Because like if every person drinks 2 liters of bottled water a day and consumes in the US 400 liters per person per day of tap water, you can imagine that the water quantity is not the problem, it's the waste. Bottled water is the waste, waste and the wasteful transport, because of course it's less efficient to transport water in trucks in bottles than in pipes.
Yes. No, it's again a fascinating subject, and we may have to do another episode just to literally drill deeper, to some of the subjects. But I wanted to just check, and then again I wanted to just maybe replay what I was trying to say before. It's fascinating to see that, you know, how much impact you can have with everything you're doing, and still, you know, there's so much more to be done. And it's still in my mind, maybe when we start coming to the end, it's about how do we help people at all levels, I guess, you know, to understand and get more involved with water. But let's leave that one for last. So if I talk about the future and scaling, you know, sustainable and impact investing, I talk about, but in this case, you know, would be perhaps the solutions around water, and again, your view in how much more investment do we need, from whom, perhaps. I picked up a video where you talked about kind of the emotional and the factual part of water, right? Which I like that, and that kind of maybe is a really nice segue from what we were just talking about. And you talk about how fragmented it is, you know, thousands of companies in the US, thousands of companies in Europe, and then obviously it's difficult to create innovation, you know, and to target all of those kind of fragmented companies. You mentioned about the case of a company that went bust, and then all of the water companies were like in trouble, right? So, but then also there are some kind of key points about why we need to. Sorry, and then you mentioned the point about is highly regulated, is global, but it's very local, because you know, it's like you said, Germany water is very different from Spain, just in Europe alone. So what is it that you think that is we need to focus on, and what help do we need?
Yeah, I mean, there's different types of investing, right? As if you take the global perspective, the infrastructure, the water infrastructure in most countries is underinvested. Now the question is, should this be done by the government because it's a basic commodity need, basic infrastructure, or should this be privatized? There's heated debates about this. If privatized properly, it can actually in many cases work better than if done by the government. If not privatized properly, it's being milked for profit at the expense of people who need water, right? But that's again a question of governance. If the governance works well, it can be privatized, no problem. If the governance doesn't work well, also probably as a public utility, it won't work well. So, but the fact remains, the infrastructure is underinvested significantly, and incredible amounts of money will be needed to maintain the infrastructure in the Western world. And if we want to achieve the sustainable development goals about safe drinking water and access to sanitation, significant amounts need to be invested also in the rest of the world to create the infrastructure. Maybe not the same infrastructure we have in the Western world, but infrastructure. And then somebody needs to pay for that infrastructure when it's used. So there's again the governance challenge of how do you at least make sure there's full cost recovery, because something where there is not full cost recovery, but it's always subsidized, will never scale. And there surely are setups where this can be done in a meaningful impact investing type way to invest into such infrastructure with acceptable returns if the governance is right. In terms of investing into innovation and technologies and so on, my punchline has always been there's more than enough money for this. There's not enough innovative technologies, because water is at the heart in infrastructure play, and it's not high tech with a few exceptions. There is good innovation, and this innovation also needs to be funded. But I see a trend where too much money is chasing too little targets. I don't want to use names now, but if a membrane manufacturer that has 600,000 or so euros in turnover and no profits goes IPO and is valued at hundreds of millions of euros, then you can see that there's too much money available, because for that company to ever be worth hundreds of millions, miracles must happen. And the consequence can be that if too much money is thrown at things, actually they fail because there's too much money thrown at them, and they don't realize that at some point they have to make a business case where customers pay enough to make money with this, because otherwise it will not scale. If you have endless supply of investor money, you can always subsidize, and it's not difficult to do 50 million turnover if you do 50 million in losses, right? You give 50 million every year to your customers as a present, that's nice, but that destroys an industry. Because at the end, also as an equipment manufacturer, there must be full cost recovery, because things can only scale if full cost recovery happens. So it's not going to be easy if more people want to deploy money in water, and like water technology, it's not going to be easy because there's not enough in infrastructure. The governance must be right. So we need some political support to get the governance right in those places where investor money could really make a difference. Now, it's not impossible, right? It's not impossible at all, but it's just difficult.
Yeah. I'm just kind of debating in my mind, because you obviously infrastructure. So if we look at governments, aka tax money, being funding, some of the infrastructure, and then, again, playing devil's advocate here, and then private investors come and they get, the companies actually make the profit and take the creme, from the supply chain of services. Is that the only way, or is there like an in between?
I mean, there have been successful private-public partnership models where governments and private investors do investments together in this infrastructure. In Southeast Asia, there have been good examples where a city then gets on that model a water and wastewater network and proper treatment infrastructure. Government funds part of it, international agencies fund part of it, investors fund part of it. So there is models. I mean, at the end, if the taxpayer pays for it, the question is, maybe there's no profit for somebody in there, but is it the same efficiency compared to a professional company doing it? Again, it depends on the country and the governance, but in many parts of the world, if the government does it, and even if they do it badly, we don't have to talk about it. Even if they do it well, is it the most efficient way to do it? Often not, because government created entities sometimes also don't have the pressure to perform on the cost side, because there's always taxpayer money. And if we want to have impact, it needs to be affordable for people, the water, in the countries where there is no infrastructure yet. But again, regulation is needed, because otherwise the risk is indeed that the same happens as with the water trucks. The water trucks are hugely profitable, and they take money away from the poor and give it to the rich because it's hugely profitable. The profit must also be fair. If you want to do impact investing, you can't expect IRRs of 30-40%. If you want to do water impact investing, because that would make water too expensive for most people to afford it.
Yeah, and I think it brings us full circle to the point that I think you made right at the beginning, which is again, there is sometimes this debate, or many times, around private investments and governments and regulations, and who is supposed to pay for it. Why the private investors get the benefit. And again, it's kind of replaying what I just said before, but what comes evident here is that people forget, you do bring the know-how, you do bring the experience, the efficiencies, the rewards are different, right? So I'm again stating the obvious for many people, but there is no kind of consequences, from a government perspective in some countries. It's just kind of a cycle of inefficiencies every 4 or 6 years, right? Plus some other challenges.
Yeah, and I mean, if you take the things people care about, right? Electricity in most countries is privatized. Telecoms in most countries is privatized. Internet is, for me, part of telecoms. Mostly is provided by private companies, right? And if you look at Germany, had Deutsche Bundespost, the monopoly for phone and mail and so on. And it was a disaster. And now that it's privatized and with competition, we get much better service at much lower prices. The problem with water is it is a natural monopoly, because it's not possible financially to have 2 or 3 companies compete on providing water and wastewater because you can't put 2 or 3 pipes in the ground, whereas you can easily put 2 or 3 cables in the ground for phone operations, right? Or do it wirelessly these days. But even in the past, you could put a second phone line in the street, but not a second water pipe. And funny enough, if you go to the history of London's water system, in some streets that I dug up when I worked for Thames Water, there were 3 main water pipes in the street because at the time there were 2 or 3 water companies competing in London when it was private companies setting up the first water infrastructure. And then you try to find which pipe a house is connected to if there was a burst and you wanted to shut off the water and you had to try 3 valves.
Crazy. And okay, let me just before we start moving to the last questions, one thing that I picked up as well from one of your previous conversations was, the common themes, and I think you talked about energy efficiency, recovery, and then I think you talked about recovery of resources, which I think, reduction on the methane side, but on this interview you mentioned phosphorus, which is another, just to add, for people's knowledge. And I think you mentioned a company called, was it Pyrex? Yeah, which is as another example. I like giving examples for people to look at, in terms of what is working and why it's good. So I just thought I'd just mention that in case you wanted to share.
I mean, phosphorus is one other resource without substitute. No plant will grow without phosphorus. And the phosphorus reserves that we mine for fertilizer are actually deteriorating in quality, contaminated with heavy metals. And the question is, when will it end, right? And there's a lot of phosphorus in wastewater. The common technology is to destroy it by treating it so that, because if you don't eliminate it from the wastewater, you get the dead rivers, because you get algae growth and then you get eutrophication of the water bodies, and then all the fish die and blah, blah. So it needs to go out of the wastewater. The typical way is chemical elimination or biological phosphorus removal, and then it ends up in the sludge and it ends up somewhere, depending on what you do with the sludge. In Germany, there's now a mandate to recover. It is not yet fully in place, but many utilities are starting to do this. It's not so easy to recover it. Our government funded projects to develop new technologies for recovery with hundreds of millions. Pyrex was one example. Also got government money to develop this. And then another government body is responsible for the fertilizer approvals. And so far, none of the recovered fertilizers with some of these decentral technologies has a German fertilizer approval. So you get millions of government money to develop a technology to recover it, and you get no permit to use it as a fertilizer. Pyrex is working on a Swedish permit because the EU allows you to use permits from other countries. And the route that is now most likely being taken in Germany is mono incineration and then recovery from the ash in a chemical process. And then you have most of the times phosphoric acid, which then is a commodity. But it definitely makes sense not to eliminate this valuable resource, phosphorus. That's crazy to eliminate it, and most of the world eliminates it.
Wow. Well, I'm glad I asked you about that. Thank you very much. So this will come to the next question, which is like, how did you end up doing this, Reinhard? How did you?
That's a good question. I mean, how did I end up getting into water? I'm a manufacturing guy. I got asked to do a piece of work for a utility in the UK. I said infrastructure in the UK. And then they said it's London. And I said, okay, I have a good friend in London. If you pay me 3 months in London, I'll go to London. And I ended up working operationally for Thames Water. In total, I almost worked 1.5 to 2 years for Thames over a 4-year period. And I worked for utilities in Australia and the US as well. And then I got headhunted into this job. I have no idea how that guy found me. And I had no intention to change job, but when I met Mrs. Clatten and realized she really wants to do something entrepreneurial in water, and I really started to like the water sector, or I really liked the water sector by then, because it's also nice, passionate people, I figured I'll never get an entrepreneurial opportunity like that again. So I quit and joined SKion, and it was the best decision I could have taken.
Amazing. That brings me also nicely to the next question. Especially working with Mrs. Clatten. What do you think makes an impact leader, which is the name of the podcast?
She has a long-term perspective and clear goals in terms of things she wants to achieve, and then she doesn't give up. She's an entrepreneur and not a fund manager, so she has real goals, not like number goals, but real goals. Water was one where her take was, okay, I want to do good investments, but I also want them to be meaningful. And she learned about water issues traveling, and then educated herself more on how serious the water challenges in the world are. And she figured it's a fairly fragmented, conservative sector. Maybe I can contribute a bit to shaking it up and making a difference. And then she started to experiment with that by giving us the chance to try a few things. And also when there was a failure, it was not, okay, we give up, but what do we learn from this failure, and how do we change our strategy? And when I look at the first strategy we had, it was minority investments in startup type technologies. And now we are an industrial player. We still work with startup type technologies. But we do this from an industrial back end where we can every once in a while pick a technology and help it succeed, but not that we just go for the single technology startup type company, but we have the customer access, reference base, engineering experience, and so on. So this long-term strategy of I believe in it, and I will go through learning curves and see it through and not get distracted by a hiccup or something. That's what makes her an impact leader.
Nice, very nice. So that's a lot of goal that's there, but again, vision, strategy, real goals, never give up kind of attitude.
But also learning, right? I mean, never give up, but also adjust to what you learn.
Yes, fantastic. Anything else from your perspective that you want to add in terms of some personal reflections perhaps on the last I think you just been on you had some time off. I don't know if you were having some writing some thoughts that you may want to share with us as well.
No reflections from having been on vacation, but what I like about the water sector also is that there's lots of passionate people who care about the resource and want to make a difference. And if you look at what happened in Germany with the flooding a few weeks ago, what happened in China with flooding recently, again, some subway stations in New York were flooded. At the same time, we have serious water scarcity issues. Like this year, again, Lake Mead is at the lowest levels ever, I think. This will get worse and not better because climate change dramatically impacts the water sector. And I mean, the UK, that has the reputation of always having rain whenever you go there, has desalination plants, right? Because in summer, water is too scarce. London has a large desalination plant. Not many people know that. It's brackish water desalination at Beckton, but still, this will become worse. And so we need to all try to be more mindful of how we consume and not waste water, and where we have wastewater in the sense that wastewater is also a terrible word in principle, where we have used water, whatever you want to call it, we need to recycle as much as possible, and also still be more efficient. So it's also about increasing efficiency and recycling where we can and recovering resources, because this will get worse and not better.
Well, not perfect, but thank you very much for that. I was going to ask you kind of a last call to action, but I guess that would be it, right?
Yeah.
Be mindful and understand your consumption, and then yes, everything that you can do to have a less impact on the climate, right?
Yeah. I mean, that also means we should, where tap water is drinking water quality, why use bottled water, right? At the same time, philosophically, you can ask the question, should all tap water be drinking water quality if 2 liters are drunk and the rest goes into washing machines and showers? There's lots of philosophical questions there, right? But in many parts of the world, people don't appreciate enough how difficult it is to get the water infrastructure to work all the time, and it's too easily wasted still. because it's maybe I was about to say it's because it's too cheap, but that's also not fair because there's enough people for whom it is still something that's not so easily affordable, right?
Yeah.
So it's pretty arrogant to say water is too cheap.
Yeah.
It doesn't recover the full cost everywhere, but still, is it too cheap? It is in terms of valuing it, but for some people still it's an affordability issue. So we need to also find models of how to manage affordability while getting full cost recovery in place.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'll say just before we finish, then just remember to treat water like diamonds. That's the takeaway.
Yeah, exactly.
You know. So thank you so much. How can people contact you? Sorry, Reinhard. Any particular way that you prefer?
I mean, you can contact me on LinkedIn. My email address is probably also somewhere on the website, or we have an info email address. We have an info@skionwater.com that also works, but Perfect. LinkedIn also works.
Perfect. Fantastic. Reinhard, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time and everything that you are doing and everything that you share with us today.
You're welcome.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. And please remember to read the full notes for the links to all the subjects that we spoke about and our sponsors. And also, I'm going to put a link to an event that is taking place at the end of October, beginning of November in Amsterdam, which is like the water event of the year, as I understand it. If people want to get involved and learn more as well. So thank you very much and enjoy this episode. Before I go, I wanted to take this opportunity to invite you to partner with me and Impact Leaders. We want to help and do more to raise awareness and create action. The podcast is one of the catalytic initiatives to help deliver on our mission to raise awareness to help transition capital into sustainable and impact investing faster and at scale. If you would like to support it, you can become a patron and also make one-off contributions at bit.ly/IL Patreon. So we're also looking for 3 founder sponsors to support our mission to enable the transition of capital into sustainable impact investing, as well as 10 impact leaders interested to join our program. Please reach out via our contact us page at ilapartners.com or go to bit.ly/IL Club to register your interest. It is bye for now and until our next episode of Impact Leaders. And God bless you all. Thank you for listening to Impact Leaders. Impact Leaders is brought to you by ILA and Partners. Please connect with us to work together in the transition of capital into sustainable and impact investing.